Interestingly enough, I went to a meeting at 4 o'clock. I always go to this 4 o'clock meeting on Zoom called the South Dixie Group. It's a great meeting. I invite all of you to attend it. You'd love it. And it was on the 8th step. A friend of mine who goes to a lot of meetings did the 8th step. So, since I was on the meeting, it was a discussion meeting, I was actually forced to think about the 8th step. This is an 8th step meeting, supposedly. So, usually I sort of walk in here, and it's not that I wing it. I mean, this is my 44th year of sobriety. I've done a few 8th steps and 4th steps and 10th steps and all those inventory things. So it's not like I'm unfamiliar with what the book says and what I'm supposed to do, but I was actually forced to focus on it. And because of that, I actually brought some literature. I actually looked at some literature. So you'll be either the beneficiaries of that or the victims of that, but whatever it is, because I'm going to read a couple of things. So usually I try not to get too prepared or too, this is what I'm going to say or that, because it sort of like blocks the filter. There's always this filter you have as an alcoholic. It's much less so with me now these days. It says we'll lose fear of people and economic insecurity, and you never want to totally claim fear of people gone or anything like that, but gone are the days where I worry about, gee, will they like me if I say this, they like me, I say that. But there's always that alcohol, that part of that alcoholism, not the drinking, the thing you struggle with after the drink and worried about what you said or how people took it or what they said or what they're thinking and all that sort of stuff that stays with you in the meetings, outside the meetings, all over the place. So I've lost that sort of filter. So there's always that little filter that says you want to talk about something. You say, well, how will they feel if I talk about this? Well, what do they think about me if I talk about this? So, that kind of stuff. And these days I always, I don't know how it's going to affect anybody. I don't know if it's going to help you or hurt you. But I always come down in favor of just telling the truth. And as I know it, and I could be totally wrong. And then you come up to me afterwards and you can tell me, well, that's all wrong. But it says, one of the things it says in the book gives me some guidance. It says, so we never apologize for God. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. Instead, we let him demonstrate through our testimony what he's done for us. And once we begin to outgrow fear. So it tells me I'm supposed to talk about what God's done for me. And it says a lot of other things, about what I should. It says each alcoholic in his own language and from his own point of view should talk about how he developed his relationship with God. So it tells me I'm supposed to talk about that. I mean, there's a few things in there that says we should talk about. And so I sort of, every meeting, whether it's 8th, 4th, 5th, whatever it is, you're going to get a lot of that stuff from me because that's what I think the book tells me. Now, I didn't think the book told me that when I was 1 year sober. And this book didn't speak that to me when I was 10 years sober. You understand what I'm saying? But the amazing thing is how much you change over a period of time. I'm 75 years old. I've been doing this thing for 43 years and 11 months. Through all sorts of problems and suffering, through cancer, through money problems, raised 4 kids, a wife who doesn't understand me, doesn't appreciate me, and all the stuff that you've been through, I've been through, and so my idea of who I am and what I am, and my sobriety, and even how I read the books, is influenced by my experience, like yours is. I mean, my first sponsor used to say, and I say this all the time, and when a man with experience meets a man with money, the man with experience will walk away with the money, the man with the money will walk away with an experience. And you can tell me that you read the book 18 times from Sunday and you know everything and you understand everything and you got 1 year. And I run into one guy, who isn't going to talk about how many times he's read the book, but he's got 40 years. And here's a guy for 40 years stayed sober and he seems relatively happy. I want to hear what he has to say. Because experience trumps intellect. Because this is all about losing the intellect, right? It says what happens to us is we start experiencing something called inspirational thinking. And it says it becomes a working part of the mind over a period of time. The longer the time, the more it becomes a working part of the mind, we come to rely upon it. So I don't want to deal with any smart alcoholics. I think somebody told me at dinner, who was it, you or somebody else, said, one of the things I like about you is because you keep things simple. I said, I keep things simple because I am simple. I used to be complicated. The book says this is simple. Dr. Bob said to Bill Wilson, he said, let's not screw this thing up, let's keep it simple. We have a way of complicating things with our own brain, especially if we don't want to do something, you know. And so I keep things sort of simple. So I'll put it to you this way, and I hope maybe you'll identify with it, because I'm going to just talk about where I'm at now. You know, I read the 12 and 12 and the Big Book and all the other books that, you know, inform me, the Bible and things like that, differently in my 44th year than I did at my first year. Words, phrases, whole paragraphs, chapters, I read differently. It's not a matter of it's right or wrong. I just see them differently than I did when I had 1 year. Words like thoroughly. You know, rarely have I seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Seems to me that should be an important deal, right? What I think is thoroughly following a path, to me today, based upon everything I've had to go through and everything I've had to change and every step I've had to walk and everything I've had to do that I didn't want to do and everything I had to do because I was suffering and everything I had to do because some mean sponsor embarrassed me or said you need to do this that I didn't want to do. Everything I've been to now, and I'm not saying I'm right now, it's just different. It says now thoroughly followed our path means something different to me than it did when I had 3 months or 6 months or even 5 years or 10 years. So if you come up to me, like I came up to my sponsor one day and say, I don't understand what's wrong, I'm not feeling good and I'm doing everything, I'm thoroughly doing the thing, and you got like 6 months, you know, I immediately know you're not, because you haven't had time to suffer and to be beaten down to a point where you're actually doing this thing the way it's supposed to be doing. What you're doing is you're doing everything you want to do anyway. That's what you're telling me. And all sorts of phrases like there is one who has all power, that one is God, may you find him now, means something different to me now because of the relationship I've had to develop and the things I've had to do, including going to Bible study and doing this and listening to certain people and all that sort of stuff, than I had to do when I had 1 year. You know, things like burn the idea into the alcoholic's mind. He can get sober no matter anything as long as he develops. That means something differently to me. I used to think the fellowship of AA, where the only requirement to stay sober was a desire, not even an honest desire to stay sober, was the same thing as the fellowship of the Spirit. And I know now that they're miles apart. That's why they use different words. There's different qualifications. You know, I mean, the stuff that they talk about, that I never understood, I never saw. You know, I didn't really know what the sixth step was all about, ever. You know, does anybody know what the sixth step is all about? Until one day when I was 20 years sober, I guess, 25 years sober, I actually saw that it meant trying to grow in the image and likeness of God. A man trying to grow or in the image and likeness of God. I didn't realize that's what it meant, you know. I thought it just meant get better, get weller. You know, stop being, you know, get perfect. You know, I didn't understand a lot of the stuff that I read today through trials and tribulations, because isn't that what it says, the way we get a new perspective? I mean, I'm just going about what the book says. It's the way I get a new perspective. By any alcoholic gets a new perspective, because our main character defect is what do you call it? Defiance. I mean, whether you like it or not, and don't blame me, right? New York says there's some guy down here taking my inventory, saying that I am a defiant son of a bitch. He doesn't know me. Well, I'm not saying that's what the book says. It says if you're in here and you're an alcoholic, you naturally want to, in the back of your mind, the first thing you're saying as soon as I start talking is you're saying, this guy is so full of shit. And that's your alcoholism. Every time you say he's full of shit, and so you block me out, that just means you're not sober. That's your alcoholism. And if it bothers you, good, because whenever you're disturbed, no matter what the cause, there's something wrong with you. So if I bother you, that's not bothering alcoholics and getting them to think about you and getting them upset isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes a bad thing is just enabling them, allowing them to go on. Yeah, I'll tell you something else. I'll give you another example. You know, they say the only step you can do perfectly is 100% is the first step. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not. It says in the big book, so it must be true, right? So if anybody ever drank, what I understood is if you drink, you obviously haven't done the first step, right? Right? Well, he obviously hasn't done the first step. So one night I saw a guy pick up a white chip who had 30 years sobriety. As a matter of fact, he was one of the guys who started the Carl Gables group. He picked up a white chip. He had 30 years sobriety. Went out and drank. So I said, well, there's a guy who obviously didn't do the first step. There's a guy who went to meetings for 30 years, sponsored a gazillion people, did all the steps, talked the steps. He obviously didn't do the first step. And I thought that, and I was sure about that. I get people all the time. They have 5 years, they have 10 years, they have 15 years. So, well, they obviously haven't done the first step. Well, it might be true in some instances, but if that's true, where's their hope? If that is true, where's their hope? Because I don't have any power to get you to do the first. I can't first step. I mean, yes, you can come into a room and you can hear people talk and you can put together and maybe you feel you have the first step, but I can't. My sponsor said, don't rob an alcoholic of his desperation. Every alcoholic has to have his last drink. Why do we insist upon hitting bottom? Because nobody's going to do the stuff that they got to do, the drastic stuff they have to do, unless they believe their lives depend upon it. How did I do the first step? I drank myself into the first step. I drank myself into a point of despondency where I thought my life was over. So if you come to me and you say, I got 5 years and I don't know, I'm thinking about drinking, I don't think I've done the first step, the only thing I can say to you is, well, I guess you better stop drinking because I don't know how to fix that. I don't know how to fix that. Maybe you just need to drink. But maybe, just maybe, if you're thinking about drinking or you're worried and you want to tell yourself, and telling yourself that you haven't done the first step, it's almost like telling yourself you got to drink again. There's no hope. Maybe it's not the first step. Maybe it's the sixth step. Maybe it's because you don't have a real relationship with God. Maybe it's some other step that you haven't even thought of because you don't want to think about it because you don't want to go to any length. Maybe it's the seventh step. Maybe it's the eighth step. Maybe it's a step that'll require you to get closer to God and give up the ghost and give up the bullshit. And maybe as a result of that, you feel bad and you feel like drinking, so you immediately think it's the first step. But maybe it's a step you just don't want to do thoroughly. So, but that's not something I knew at 5. At 5 years, I was still thinking if you drank in, you obviously hadn't done the first step. Never occurred to me that maybe you hadn't done the sixth step. Or the seventh. That's like, they used to call the sixth and seventh step old timer step. I didn't start thinking about that stuff. In other words, down the road, your perception changes. So my perception has changed on the eighth step. And so when I talk to you about the eighth step tonight, I'm not going to talk to you about it like I was doing step series. I've done step series for the last 40 years, 38 years, 40 years. I'm not going to talk to you about the eighth step like I would have done an eighth step meeting when I had 5 or 6 or 10 years. When I used to do these meetings, and I'm not saying they were bad, and I'm not saying these kind of meetings are bad. They're all good. It's all good. We're like in a one-room schoolhouse here. We got guys with 2 weeks, and they have no idea what the hell we're talking about, and they don't know what 8 step, 6 step, first step, anything like that. We got guys with 30 years, and they have their own idea of what that's all about, So we're in a room, but the bottom line is, I can't talk to you like I have 6 months. I can't talk to you like I have 2 years. First of all, I'm senile. You'll attest. I'm senile. Yes. You got to believe me. If you have no idea how screwed up I am as far as when you get to be a certain age, I'm constantly turning to him and I'm saying, what am I trying to say? And I forget names and everything. I can't hardly remember stuff. There's certain things I remember, like they were yesterday, that my sponsors told me, things that happened and their stories. But a lot of stuff I don't remember. But what I do remember is what I do know, which is maybe a good thing because it helps me keep things simple. I know how I feel about things today. I know what the 8th step means to me today. So all I can tell you is what the 8th step means to me today and what it has to do with my sobriety today. And it may not sound like any 8-step you've ever heard, because the way I used to do the 8-step, like the way I used to do all the steps, was to teach mechanically how you do it. This is how you do it. And then I read some things from the big book and stuff like that. Never really understanding the depth of why we're really doing these things. You ever really try to think deeply why you have to do the 4-step? Why you have to do the 8-step? Why you have to do the 10-step? I mean, really deep. I'm not talking about, well, I have to do it. I'm not talking about this stuff like, well, if I don't do it, I'll drink. Yeah, that's true. There's nothing. I'm talking about even beyond that. You ever think really what that has to do with anything? I know we all understand, well, if you don't do a 5-step, book says you're probably going to drink. Everything's about the drinking, isn't it? You know, okay, if I don't do the 5th step or the 4th step, it means that I'll suffer. You know, I'll be like that guy here and there once in a while. A former drinker says, feel better, look better, having a better time. We laugh at Sally. Soon we'll have to try the old game again because he's not happy with his sobriety. Soon he'll know loneliness as few do. He'll be at the jumping off place. Yes, if we don't do those steps, because we'll either drink again or we'll be miserable. Yeah, okay. I'm talking about, you ever go deeper than that? Why will we be miserable? Why is it important to rip yourself apart, stomp on yourself, flail yourself in front of another human being, and constantly understand what a monster you are and were and what you're capable of doing? Why is that good? Isn't it good to just vent? And isn't it good to just gather people around you that'll tell you how great you are? You know what I mean? Isn't it good to just use positive affirmations so you don't feel badly about yourself? I mean, how do you get rid of those thoughts, you know, the thoughts, I'm such a piece of shit, I ought to kill myself. I'm never going to get this thing. How do you get rid of the thoughts of loneliness? Well, what does all this stuff have to do with... so I used to do it mechanically. Because you can do this thing mechanically, and it's nothing bad about it, especially with newcomers. Like, how do you do the 4th step? I'd say, turn to this page, and there's a chart. The first is a list of resentments. I am resentful at my wife. She doesn't understand me. She treats me horribly. She yells at me. She screams. She's always criticized me. Affects my... Then they give you like a multiple choice. Self-esteem, sexual relationship, you know, ambition. They give you, and then you check them off. And you keep on going through that. And then the second list is disregarding what assholes they are. You know, it's a very important list, by the way. Disregarding, because the 8th step comes out of this list. The 8th step says disregarding how crappy my wife is. Where have we been wrong? Where is our faults? And we list our faults. You know what I mean? Put them down in black and white. Then there's a list of fears, a list of things we've done to hurt people sexually. We put them all. It's all there in the 4th step. We look at them. It's done. We now know how crazy we are. I mean, listen. How many times before you came to AA, before you stopped drinking, did you say to somebody, "I'm sorry"? Does anybody? Well, maybe you're different than me. My whole life was, "I'm sorry." Yeah. I'm sorry, it's not my fault. I'm sorry, I was wrong. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I think there may have been times where I was sorry and I actually thought I was sorry. Although I rarely said I was wrong. You know, usually I'm sorry needs to be followed up. This is the way it works. I say I'm sorry, and then you say, oh, that's okay. That's the way it works. I say, Mick, I'm sorry. And Mick says, oh, forget about it. That's all right. Takes the monkey off my back. Now, let's say I say, I'm sorry to Mick, and I said, I'm sorry, and he doesn't say anything. Then I say, what the hell's wrong with you? I said I was sorry. What the fuck is wrong with you? Yeah. Because the way it works is I say I'm sorry, the slate is wiped clean, and you say, don't you ever worry about it. It's okay. That's the way it's supposed to work. It's all about me. So is that what the 4th step is about? I'm sorry. Another, maybe an in-depth I'm sorry. You know, I'm sorry to a lot of people, and I don't know whether it is. It isn't. You know what I mean? But I would teach it mechanically. You do this, and this, you do all this stuff, and then so that should, I think, pretty much satisfy the 8th step deal. You got a whole list of people. And then all of a sudden you get to the fifth step. Now this gets really even good, because then you were supposed to go up to somebody in the fifth step and go over the shit again in front of another human being who gets to tell you that when you say, oh, and then I did this, and then I did that, and then I did this, they get to tell you, and sometimes they tell you this, sometimes they tell you something different. They get to tell you how much you don't realize you hurt somebody. In other words, they make it even worse. In a loving way. They say, Russell, it is a big deal. You not only hurt her, you hurt your in-laws, you hurt everybody. Imagine how they get to make you feel worse. You know what I mean? Worse in a weird... Now, in some respects, they actually help you, because I would tell my sponsor... See, what happened to me is I tell my sponsor my story and all the stuff on the fourth step, and stuff I didn't even feel bad about. I didn't feel guilty about it. He'd say, you need to look at that. You know, you're missing the point. You really hurt somebody there. And some things I felt really guilty about, he'd say, well, everybody does that. You know, you're just beating you up. So he would mollify it. But the truth is, I had to bring another person in to listen to what I had to say so he could even fine-tune what I'm looking at. So that should be basically it, right? So now I have to what? Now wait a second, there's another step. I mean, I've done the fourth step, and I've done the fifth step. There's a line in the Bible. I mean, a lot of my stuff, when I was about 10 years, I started doing that because I was dying. And I look at everything through and you know, they were using that I'm not going to go through the whole, I could cite chapter and verse, I'm not going to do that. When they wrote the big book, they were using the Holy Bible, but you don't have to worry about that stuff. But the bottom line is, there's a line that helps me see what's actually going on. It says, and this is a line, it says, worldly sorrow leads to death, but godly sorrow leads to repentance and salvation. Worldly sorrow is self-pity. I'm a self-pity-aholic. I don't know how many self-pity-aholics we have in here. I lived a life of feeling sorry for myself. Sometimes it came out as anger. Sometimes it came out as fear. Sometimes it came out of me hurting other people. Sometimes it came out as depression, you know what I mean? A thumb-sucking crybaby, or complaining or talking to other people behind their back. But I lived a life, it was a life of death. I was dead inside, of self-pity. All roads led to self-pity, no matter what happened in my life. And so that's what it says. It says, worldly sorrow, the sorrow of the world leads to death, but godly sorrow leads to life. And what is godly sorrow? The night I got on my knees and I asked God to come in my life, I wasn't feeling sorry for myself. I felt ashamed of what I had become. I looked in the mirror and I said, who am I kidding? I felt ashamed of what I had allowed myself to become. There's a difference. There's a difference between becoming ashamed of what you had become and feeling sorry. Feeling sorry for yourself leads to death in no place. Feeling sorry of what I had become and being at the end of my rope led me to get on my knees and ask God to come into my life. There's a difference. Believe me, there's a difference, and that leads to something called repentance. And repentance is very important because that's all about something called humility. It's all about something called humility. Now, is humility important? Well, let me just read you the definition of repentance, because that's what the big book is all about. Repentance is a change of heart and mind that brings us closer to God. Do you think AA has anything to do with a change of heart and mind? Mm-hmm. It says we're reborn. We're new people. We want to make up for all our sins and everything we did. It includes turning away from sin and turning to God for forgiveness. Do you think the big book or these steps have anything to do with that? It is motivated by, what do you think it's motivated by? Love of God and a sincere desire to obey his commandments. Love of God, a sincere desire, I'll put it in a 6-step sense, to become an image and likeness of your Creator. It's not motivated by I want to feel better. It's motivated because you want to change who you are, because you're so ashamed of what you had become. Reviewing my actions and feeling contrition or regret for past and present wrongdoings, which is accompanied by a commitment to actual actions that show and prove a change for the better. That's repentance. You think this program has anything to do with that? Man, you got to work with a lot of alcoholics. I worked with a lot of alcoholics in the last 44 years. You know, my sponsors say you don't rush, you can talk and walk through the walk. Let me tell you something. The one thing, I am so full of shit. There's nobody that's more full of shit than me. I have a PhD in full of shit. I'm an attorney. I am so full of shit. You can't understand. I could talk to a jury and get them to believe stuff that's full of shit. You understand what I'm saying? So you know what that means? That means when I sponsor people, I recognize full of shit like in a nanosecond. I recognize alcoholics that say stuff to me and they think they're right, they're saying something, and I see exactly what's going on in their brain because I've been there. I've seen all the bullshit, you know what I mean? For glossing over old ideas and bullshit stuff. And that's what it's all about. So in any event, so then we get the seventh step, which is very interesting. So what does this have to do with humility? Since this, you guys don't think this is ever going to have anything to do with the eighth step, do you? That's like a challenge. That's like throwing down a challenge to me, you know? Step 7. Since this step, so specifically, because this is leading up to step 8, you know. Since this step, and by the way, by the time you get to step 7, you've already done steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and made it working. You're starting to do step 6, right? So we're like coming up on 8, right? So this isn't necessarily somebody who's got one day. Since this step so specifically concerns itself with humility, whatever that is, I was actually going to do a talk tonight on humility, but I never do.
Enough people.
I never do it with a group this small.
Right.
Since this step so specifically concerns itself with humility, we should pause here to consider what humility is and what the practice of it can mean to us. So apparently, if you're doing step 7, one of the things you're supposed to do is try to figure out what humility means. Have you guys ever tried to figure out what humility means? Let me tell you how wrong you can be about humility. So I come into AA and I sit in the back of the room, and I don't see a thing. By the way, the reason I don't say anything is because I'm scared to talk. What I tell myself is I don't tell myself I'm scared, even though I am scared. What I say to myself, because I'm an alcoholic and I can twist things in my mind, I can say, I'm humble. And what I do is I say, look at that asshole in the front of the room. Thinks he knows everything. You know, he's so full of shit. You know what I mean? He says, I'm back here and I'm humble. So my sponsor comes up to me and says, and I've told this before, but it's what he says, what the hell is wrong with you? He says, so what? He says, every time I see you at a meeting, you never say anything. Everybody's always told you never say anything. I said, and I say what I believe. I have nothing to say. I don't have anything important to say. And he looks at me and he says, you know, these people come here and they share intimate things about their lives. They put themselves on the line. They're just as worried as you are about what people will think about them. But they open up and they talk. And you sit back like some sort of voyeur, listening to everything they say, and you don't see a word. You're all get, you're no give. Who the hell are you to say you don't have anything important to say? How the hell do you know? And I said, I thought I was being like a very humble guy, not saying anything. And I don't know how many of you have ever spoken in front of groups, or actually, you know, when an alcoholic says I'm not ready to speak, what he's really trying to say, I'm scared shitless. That's what it's alcohol code. The humblest thing in the world is to go in front of a group of 20, 30, 300, 1,000 people, standing up there as a bullshit alcoholic and telling your story for an hour. You don't know how humbling that is unless you've done it. Unless you've actually stood in front of people and put yourself on the line for an hour talking to people. You know, you don't know how humbling it. You don't even have an opinion. you don't know nothing because you haven't done it. Because you're so self-centered and so involved in yourself and your little plans and designs and selfish that you would never sacrifice yourself to do that. Now, that's a different perspective, isn't it? Isn't that a different perspective, right? You know? So I'm back there in my throne of contempt, looking at people that are doing this shit, you know what I mean? And trying to help other people, and thinking badly of them, and thinking I'm a hot shit. Only a fucking alcoholic would do something like that. A guy who's steeped in this disease. I don't care whether he's 10 years sober, 20 years sober. Indeed, the attainment of greater humility is the foundation principle of each of A's 12 steps. Did you know that? The attainment of greater humility is the foundation principle of each of A's 12 steps. It's the foundation of every step that we're doing now. And this is the 7th step. This is before the 8th step. So don't you think you ought to be interested in this humility thing? If you get a good sponsor, he'll help you out with that humility thing, by the way. And if you don't get a good sponsor, you don't have a sponsor, life will help you out with that humility thing. For without some degree of humility, no alcohol can stay sober at all. Nearly all AAs have found, too, that unless they develop much more of this precious quality than may be required just for sobriety, they still haven't much chance of becoming truly happy. So if you want to become truly happy, rocking in the 4th dimension of existence, you might want to learn about this stuff. Without it, they cannot live to much useful purpose, or in adversity, be able to summon the faith that can meet any emergency. So I say that's different. Well, what does that have to do with the 8th step? What is that? Well, it does come right before the 8th step. So let's go into the 8th step now. And before I do that, I want to read something to you, which sort of like is kind of interesting that I came across, which helps me draw the connection as to why because most of this stuff goes counter to our intuition and our old way. You remember the part of the book that says, unless you get rid of your old ideas? It's okay. You know that part of the big book that says, we must get rid of our old ideas so the result is nil until we let go absolutely? So let me it's actually not in here. It's actually in the big book. Even better. Let me see. Let me go into the big book on step 8. Step 8. So that is the big book, step 8. I want to read you something. God, I hope it's in here. This is what they do. They sneak in and they take it out.
They moved it on you.
They moved it on. Ah! So does anybody know what the real purpose of the 8th step is? Raise your hand if you know the real purpose of the 8th step. Anybody know?
Get people off your back. Get people off your back.
Anybody really know the real purpose of the 8th step? Oh, you missed that.
Just kidding.
You missed that. You've been around 10 years, 20 years. You don't know the real purpose of the 8th step? That's okay. I didn't know the real purpose of the 8th step either. I had no idea for years what the real purpose. You think it's so you won't feel guilty? So you won't have any regrets? So you won't feel bad? What you think? You don't think? Well, it may have something to do with humility. That's a hint. Did you know the big book tells you what the real purpose of the 8th step is? Yeah, it's on page 77. You guessed it. It has something to do with your relationship with God. Doesn't have to do with you. Doesn't have to. Why does every alcoholic think that this must have something to do with you? Have it something to do with me? Oh, I know why. That's because the only person you really give a shit about is you. I get it. You feel that this doesn't have to do with God or other people. You feel that the reason you do these steps is because you're so important and your happiness is so important that this is all about you. And that's the only reason you ultimately do it. So you won't feel guilty, and you won't drink, and you won't do this, and you don't do that. That's what you feel. That's not the real purpose. That's not even close to the real purpose. Well, I'll give you a hint. This one you'll know. What's your job? If you're an alcoholic, what's your job?
Going to the likeness of the Creator.
Your job is to be of maximum purpose to God and other people. Your job is not to be happy. Your job is not to suffer. Your job is not to go through difficult stuff. Your job is, am I the only one who ever read this in the big book? I mean, I understand you can be so blind that you could read the entire book 10 times and miss this. Am I the only one that knows that that's what the job is? It says, right in the book, it says, God is the Father, we are the children, He is the principal, we are the agent, He is the employer, we're the worker. Most good ideas are simple. Remember, I'm a simple man. They're simple. And this is the thing in which we walk through the arch of freedom. Our job now is to be at a place where we can be of maximum service to God and other people. I think it's somewhere in the book. Am I the only one who saw this? Okay, so here we're on the 8th step. Now you think it's about you won't feel guilty. You'll get all that. That's a byproduct. You'll get all that too. But here's what it says. But this is not an end in and of itself. It says, our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. This whole book is for us to be like a royal priesthood, helping other people, going out there, whether we got cancer or not cancer, no matter what's going on, just thinking about other people. Think about other people. So I'm going to read you something else. So what does that have to do with humility? Apparently it has something to do with humility. Let me read you. This is like a little thing out of what? What did I do? Did I do something bad? Okay, this is a little something. Let me read you this little story. There's a great story it's biblical, but it won't kill you. Don't worry. Make believe it's not. Make believe it's just a story. And tell me what you think of this. 2 men went up to the temple to pray. 2 people went up to the temple and prayed. Nothing wrong with that. One is a Pharisee. A Pharisee was like the Pope, was like the hotshots, like the priests, okay? And the other was a tax collector. They hated tax collectors. The priest stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people. I'm not a robber, I'm not an evildoer, I'm not an adulterer, or even like this tax collector here. I fast twice a week and give 10th to all I get. I contribute to the AA basket whenever it goes around. I speak and I sponsor people. Thank God I'm just a really good AA. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me. I'm a sinner. I'm a sinner. I tell you that this man, the man who got on his knees and said, have mercy on me, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. So here's the deal. I've told this story many times before about my own life. And you've probably heard it before, but I'll tell it kind of quickly again. It's just one story and about what's going on with me. Because I think it's important to throw yourself into this thing rather than just quote stuff. So I was married to a very nice, decent gal. And I married her the way I did all things. I looked at this girl, I looked at the way she looked, and I said, if I had that woman, my whole life would change. Everything would be, if I only had that woman. And so I pursued her like alcoholics pursue everything. Like I pursued a new car, like I pursued a job, like I pursued money, like I pursued a new suit. I looked at her as a thing that if I got, it would make me okay. You would think I was okay. I would think I was okay. Plus the physical attraction, all that sort of stuff. And I got her. You know, it's like sometimes I say I wanted what she had and I was ready to do anything to get it, you know, and I got her. And I changed my whole life around just to get this gal. And once I got her, I had her. It's like once you get a car, you have a car. It becomes a used car. You know what I mean? I got her. I had a child, beautiful child. He's my son today. He's like 50 years old. Can't believe it. Had a son, and then at 5 years before, and then I was drinking with the guys, and by the time I was 2 years sober, I wasn't coming home at night. I was just sitting in the bars and looking at the other women, saying if I wasn't married, I could have those women. That's me. That's me. That's the real me. That's not the guy you see right here. That's the real Russell. That's me. The guy who leaves that gal at home, married her, and then goes out to look to get laid and goes out with other women. And prides himself in the fact that he never physically did that with another woman. All I did was come up at 4 o'clock every morning, in the morning every day, wishing I wasn't married. And then, after I came home drunk and she finally kicked me out, I was actually happy. I was excited. I didn't have the guts to ask for a divorce, you know, because I felt guilty. But she had kicked me out, so it wasn't my fault. And then we went to the marriage counselor, and he started saying, Ronnie, what do you want to do? He says, well, how do you want Russell to change? And I wasn't even listening to what she said because I had a date that night with the redhead. And I just felt, I went there because I felt guilty not going there, but I wanted to get out of the marriage. So I didn't want to be dragged back in, get like Godfather number 3. They were dragging me back in. And so they asked me, the lawyer, the state attorney, the prosecutor, what do you want to do to change your wife? And I said, I just want to date other women. Now, I don't know whether the guys get this, but I think the women do. That's why you get a lot of evil stares when they tell the story. I think they understand what that would do to them if they were dealing with an asshole like me. And you know who that is? That wasn't some guy that the Martians came down and replaced me with. You know, that was me. That's me. You understand? Now, I did my 8th step. My wife had cancer. My former wife had cancer. But and she lived many years after that and married another guy, one of my fraternity brothers and everything. And I went up to see her and I made my amends. And we were friendly. And I made my amends. As a matter of fact, I'm not even going to go into that whole story. I talked about how I was wrong and everything like that and everything that happened between us. And she actually said, I thought I was wrong because I could have been a better wife. And I said, you weren't wrong at all. You were smart to kick me out. If you had stayed with me, we would have never been able to talk to each other. I said, you were absolutely right. You were a great wife, you know. And I made my amends. But I want to tell you something. As I said, I'm in my 44th year. And a day doesn't go by where a thought doesn't go through my mind where my heart is breaking. I have a broken heart. You know, my sponsor told me, whenever you talk to somebody, you know, just you remember you're talking to somebody with a broken heart because they probably have my heart is broken for the way I treated my wife and my in-laws, my first wife and my in-laws. It just breaks my heart. But I've decided, you know, the big book says we will not regret the past and wish to shut the door on it. I don't wish to shut the door on it. I do regret it. I don't know what kind of human being I would be if I actually thought the slate is wiped, everything. Now, I happen to believe with my theology that the Lord forgives me and I'm going to be okay. And that's okay because I'm repentant about it. And every day I think about it. But you know something? I've decided that's the greatest thing in the world. Something I thought was bad. You know, why can't I get rid of this? I've decided that it's the greatest thing in the world because you know what it does? It tells me exactly who I am and what I could be if it wasn't for the Lord working for me in my life. I don't tell myself I'm a great guy or I'm fantastic. I don't know when I stopped saying to other people or myself, I'm spiritual, not religious. There's this theme that goes around here where people say things like, well, I'm spiritual, not religious. I'm spiritual, not religious. Those words haven't come out of my mouth in 15 years. You You know what I mean? I can't tell you. I couldn't even say them. You know what I mean? Because the one thing that thought gives me as to who I was and what I was, you know what it does? It humbles me. It gives me the same feeling I had when I picked up my white chip in front of 100 people. And I finally said to him, I said, I need help. I'm screwed up. I need help. It keeps me, I'm going to use the word humble. It keeps me on my knees before God. What it also helps me do is work with other people. Because whenever I never meet anybody in my life where I can't say to myself, there but for the grace of God go I. No matter how fucked up you are, no matter how you're talking to me, I may get frustrated with you sometimes, but I know that I'm no better than you are. I'm not better than anybody. I give God all the credit. I don't sit around and say, oh, I'm talking to this group, I'm doing this, or I'm doing that. I know exactly who I am and what kind of person I can be. I think the greatest thing in the world, I mean, this is just my opinion, is no matter how much time you have, is you can still carry in your brain the fact that you're nothing and God is everything. That God, and I think that sort of comports with our big book, where it says, God is everything, or He is nothing. Half measures of L is nothing. We stood at the turning point. I think that attitude comports with the big book. Understanding, and the other thing it does is it makes me grateful to God, because I don't believe I'm necessarily entitled to any of this stuff, or I deserve any of this stuff. I'm not saved or in the place I am because I'm a good person. You know what I mean? Or I'm entitled to it. You know what I mean? I'm so not entitled to it. And so what it does is it keeps me steady in a certain place in my life instead of, getting too big for my britches or anything like that. And so I think that's one of the reasons for the 8-step is not only all the other stuff that goes with it, the lack of, because the one thing it doesn't do is it doesn't rule my life. I mean, that feeling I tell you about with my ex-wife doesn't ruin my life. I don't feel guilty all the time. But I'm telling you, it's a thought I have that keeps me centered, and trying to help other people and realizing how grateful I am to God and why I want to do His works. So in any event, I don't know whether that's the 8-step or not, but that's my 8-step. Thank you very much.